Welcome in, everybody. Great to see you. Kay Murray, Luis Miguel Echegaray, and Janusz Michallik here to react to Chelsea losing 2-0 to Tottenham at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. That's now 6 without a win for Graham Potter's men. It's their third consecutive loss, and it is their worst run in 10 years. It's been quite I was going to say the ride for them, but it's not a good ride. It's like one of those really bad roller coasters that you're going on, but it almost feels like there's nothing going up. It's just down, 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 down. So we're going to start with the reaction to Chelsea, guys, and then we'll get to Spurs and what they did. It's not good news for Potter, obviously. That's stating the obvious here, Luis, because we keep hearing that he's going to be given time, but that pressure just keeps mounting and mounting. And a third consecutive loss like this and not scoring a goal either, it just continues for us to point to the fact that they've spent all this money and there is not an orthodox striker for them to have in this side, especially with all that money spent.
The key component right there, Kay Murray, is what you just said at the end there, right? The planning in January was disastrous. So much money spent on tremendous star power, individual prowess, but they've scored 4 goals in all competitions in 2023. Let me say that again, 4 goals. My very own Olley Watkins has more goals in 2023 than Chelsea Football Club. So yes, Graham Potter, unfortunately, the cruel reality of the Premier League means that Graham Potter probably is going to be even under more stress. But Graham Potter is not the main issue here, because obviously things will click. This is a fine manager who obviously needs time, but the cruel reality of the Premier League doesn't give you that much time. I just think that, like you said, all that money spent in January, and how could you not focus on a top striker? You don't even have to spend that much money. You don't have to get Erling Haaland or somebody like that, but somebody that can help you get some goals. And unfortunately, to me, that's the problem, where Todd Boehly, by spending so much money, simultaneously gave so much pressure to his manager to deliver, because this game of ours is not about individual prowess, it's about cohesion. And that right now is not happening with Chelsea. So I feel for Graham Potter, I feel for Chelsea fans, and right now the reality is pretty simple. A lot of star power, it will click, but it doesn't matter because you need goals at this moment, and it's not happening.
I mean, you say it will click, but do you see any signs, Janusz, that it will click for this Chelsea side? Because it's such a big squad that he's got to deal with. He's got to decide what his best 11 is. I mean, we did see some good signs against Borussia Dortmund, even though that was another loss for them. But what signs are there that there is going to be clicking going on with this side?
None. There are no signs, right? I mean, sports are results based. And, if you look at Graham Potter, I mean, he's a likable figure. I still do believe he's a good manager. But I mean, at some point, it is about results, and you have to show that progress. I mean, all season, Chelsea hasn't beaten an opponent in the top half of the table all season. Not one, right? If you go all the way back to the last season, I think they have 5 wins in 28 games against a team in the top half of the table. I'm not even talking top 4, top 6, whatever you want to say. So, that's obviously not just on Graham Potter, but since he came in, I mean, what is it, 2 wins? And, when you look at that from that standpoint, you have to wonder. I mean, it started okay today, I think, but the end product always seem to be the same, and you can't escape that. And if they are going to give him time, fair play. But at what stage do you say to yourself, for a club like Chelsea, how long are we going to wait for a little bit of progress right now? Because at this point, they can't win and they can't score. I mean, those are important 2 things in the game of football.
So what makes you think then, Luis, that they're going to click? What signs have you seen that it just has to come together? Or is it a feeling that it has to because of the money that's been spent and because of the quality of these players and the fact that we do know Potter's a good manager?
Yeah, notice one thing I said. I said it will click. I didn't say when it will click, right? Maybe they need a whole preseason. Maybe they need to wait for 2023, 2024 to get it going, right? But it will click. It has to. It just, obviously, I think Potter needs a little bit more time. But like Janusz said, you need wins. You need goals in the Premier League, and there is no time. And Chelsea fans are obviously getting tired. And I do want to say one thing, though. It's very important to stop with all the horrific, and I've seen it, I've read them, and they're happening. Some good reporting as well from the UK about this on Graham Potter himself. Yes, he obviously takes a lot of the criticism here, but let's be clear about the picture here, okay? It's one thing for all the blame to go on the manager, and then the other thing over the overall project itself. And January was just not a wise way to be spent. Todd Bowley was throwing money at everything. He didn't even get everything that he wanted, at everything. And yes, on one side of things, it can be commendable because, you think, oh, the ambition is there, I love it, etc. But on the other point, it wasn't spent in a wise way. So to answer your question, I think it will take time, and it probably won't happen until next season. Will Potter be there by then? I don't know. But who can fix this? Obviously, you have to change the strategy because right now, Potter's a manager that likes to, keep the ball in the midfield, go wide, penetrate, use the fullbacks. But right now, there's so many cooks in one kitchen. You just need to score goals. And sometimes maybe even think about the ugly style, right? Be more direct, find somebody up there. But they don't have anybody. So I really don't have the answer here, because if you get rid of Potter, what do? Bring back Thomas Tuchel, find somebody else, Pochettino? I'm not sure. But I'll tell you one thing, that this thing is not just a Potter problem. It's an overall lackluster planning from the owner and the vision itself.
Go on, Janusz.
It's a striker problem. I mean, compare the two teams, right? I mean, both teams in the first half were doing an excellent job trying not to score, by the way. Top notch, both sides, because there's nowhere near, right? But you, in the back of your head, I'm sure you and our viewers and listeners always said, right? There's always Harry Kane. I mean, that's the difference. I mean, Spurs have 46 goals and Harry Kane scored, what, 18 of them? And do the math right there, whatever, 28 goals without Harry Kane, and Chelsea have 23 scored on the season. I know that this is not that simple, but to some degree it is, because Spurs aren't special this season, that's for sure, and they have their up and downs. But at the end of the day, there's always Harry Kane who consistently scores goals.
Which goes back to my point. Which was the overall planning in January. Instead of spending 100 million on Enzo Fernandez, a tremendous player who's not going to solve everything, why don't you just make your number one ticking thing in your priority list in January? We need a striker. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang is not working. Kai Havertz is not really a natural center forward. We need somebody that can get us goals. Okay, we may not be able to get exactly who we want, but we need goals. That was a problem before Christmas. That was a problem in January. That was a problem with or without Potter. So instead of focusing just on all these amazing players, bring in Joao Felix. Oh, somebody else is going for Moises Caicedo. We're going to go for him too. Oh, let's spend all this money on Enzo Fernandez. No. Focus on getting a striker. And if they would have added a little bit more effort into that, I think it would have been a bit of an easier situation. So yes, Graham Potter takes responsibility. Of course he does. He's the head coach. But come on. This planning in January was disastrous. Look at all that money that was spent and not one on a top-notch striker. That's ridiculous.
All right, so it's glaringly obvious that they need a striker, and we all know that. But this is what I don't understand, Janusz, because what was it? Just 2 shots on target today. And you can point to some other teams. There's been criticism that Man City are like struggling more because of Haaland and because that's not working for them. Obviously, that they've paid to critics like that in their last result. And then even with a team like Bayern Munich, when they lost Robert Lewandowski, we still saw other players who weren't out-and-out strikers sharing the role of getting some of those goals. So why isn't even that happening for Chelsea in the meantime?
Well, because of the number of players, right? I mean, when things don't go well and you've bought, you've already had a good squad. Now, I think, this season, I don't know, 13, 8, 8 during the January window, right? I mean, this is that long-term planning. The trouble with long-term planning is that you never know if it's going to come good, right? And at some stage, you have to assure the players that that there is a vision there. And I think some of these players looking around. I mean, look, if Chelsea come and offer you a contract, you're going to come. But a vision is very difficult, because I promise you, in that dressing room, some of the key players. I mean, who are still the best players is the veteran, right? Even somebody like Azpilicueta, Thiago Silva, who, by the way, now is out as well. I don't know for how long he may be available next game. I mean, but they have to be looking around and saying to themselves, well, this does look like a long-term project. And, a lot of these players aren't used to it, but most importantly, the fans aren't used to it. And I think Todd Bowley is forgetting one thing. I think, in a way, I think he was liked when he came in because the situation was dire, but he has to remember that he doesn't have a carte blanche just because he's an owner. So that's a very, very difficult and toxic situation. If not now, it's going to be very toxic very, very quickly.
Let's get to some of the moments in the game then. I'm interested to know what you guys thought at the end of the first half and the red card that wasn't in the end, when there was an initial spat, which Richarlison was involved with. Emerson Royale comes barging in on Ziyech, and then he pushes him in the face. that was a bit of a weird moment because we didn't really know what was going on. I don't know if the referee did at some point, Luis.
Yeah, and that's why I'm just like, I mean, what did we do 2 weeks ago when, we did our little hot take on why I really detest, I don't detest VAR. I hate the way it's being used right now. Today was a perfect example. It was like so confusing. It was a little bit like, John Travolta in Pulp Fiction when he's like kind of lost looking around and stuff, that meme. Like that's exactly what everybody's feeling right now in the Premier League. I don't know what's happening. Ziyech originally was given a red card because of the official rule of violent conduct. He pushed his hand, even though it didn't touch his face, he shoved it towards the shoulder, reaching up to the face. That, for the referee in that moment, Stuart Atwell, seemed as violent conduct, which I agree. Then VAR comes in and says, hold on a second, take a look at it again. They did, and then he reverses it back to a yellow, which was very confusing because it's not about whether you touch the face or not. That was clearly violent conduct. Then the official referee group came in at the end. We were watching it live. I mean, the guys from NBC were talking about it, and they said, yeah, apparently the official calling was like, at the end of the day, it didn't seem as violent conduct, which I completely disagree. Here's the problem. It was so confusing in the way it was handled. And when VAR comes in that specific moment to tell Stuart Atwell to relook at that, it belittles and undermines the decision-making of the main official. So already there's a problem. And then there's no explanation at the end of it, not at the end at least. So that was a really badly managed way of doing things. I thought it should have been a red, definitely. And it made it even more confusing when he was asked to look at the monitor again.
What did you make of the whole situation, Janusz?
Well, first of all, an inconsistency. That's first and foremost. We'll get to everything because I don't know if 2 weeks ago you were talking about, here we have Casemiro giving hogs, and getting a red card. To I think it was Will Hughes in that game against Fulham, right? So you look at that, and certainly if that was a red card, this must be a red card. But they had no idea. We're finding out a little bit more because look, the referee didn't see that. He didn't know, because if he did, he went to assistant referee who just mentioned to him there was a push in the face. And usually that's probably the biggest decision, right? But look how long it took him to give that red card. First, he was going around and showing the 2 yellow cards. The first one was on Havertz, and that's solved because certainly Ziyech went into, I think it was Richarlison, right? That would have been a yellow card, but I'm being told right now that there was a little contact for Havertz, who got a yellow card. Then he showed another yellow card. Then finally, after a minute or two, he showed a red card. So I think they were absolutely confused. He didn't see it. He didn't know what to do. And ultimately, I think when speaking with the referee, finally came to his senses and gave the red card, and of which afterwards I think PGMOL, is that what it's called?
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah,
decided that there was a negligible force. The intent was there. It went off a shoulder. As a player, I could almost go with that. But that was a second. He came for second, Ziyech, didn't he? Because he pushed Højbjerg really, really hard. He should have known by then. Somebody on his team should have said, hey, stay away from that. And he went after them. So, it's just a mess because nobody truly knows. So here we are. Now we have referees and VAR really not knowing what to do with it. So they weaseled out of this somehow, and now we're going to be hearing million explanations of the gray area, what it may have been, and here we are again.
James Olley was at the game today, and he's joining us now. There he is. Welcome in, James. Great to have you. We'll get to the overall game, but seeing as though we are just talking about that moment where Ziyech, it looked like he had a red card and it was overturned, what was the reaction in the stadium to all that? And were they as confused as we were watching at home?
Yeah, it was farcical, really. I think it was over 4 minutes between the incident and then the rescission of the red card. So that is a long time, and it's a long time to be sat watching at home. It feels an awful long time in the stadium, especially when obviously communication is a major issue with VAR generally, so people don't really know what's happening. And I think normally the flow of these things is that a referee makes a decision, he's then encouraged to go to the monitor and then change it. But it appeared as though because of the delay, he'd been receiving instructions. He then gave the red card, but he was then immediately told to go and review it. So it all sorts of seemed to happen the other way around. But just one sort of point I would make about that is that I think this was a bit of a failure of refereeing going back about 5 or 10 minutes earlier, because there was a challenge by Harry Kane made on Kepa when he cleared the ball, where he quite clearly just body checks Kepa, and it is a yellow card every single day of the week. He doesn't give that yellow card, and it just escalated the tensions inside the stadium in the play. That just led to, if you watch that game back, that sort of between that challenge and the red card that wasn't a red card, it just started to escalate because players were getting irritated. They thought they could get away with a little bit more, and the referee just started to lose control of it a little bit. And it all came from that point where I just cannot fathom how he did not book Harry Kane for that. And if he does, it just nips it in the bud. It just tells everyone, look, calm down, okay, tensions are high, London derby, 0-0, games in the balance, all of that. But by letting that go, it just encouraged people to just get carried away from themselves. And it eventually led to a situation where, by that point, really, he'd lost control and needed VAR to intervene.
Yeah, the overall narrative of the game was really influenced by everything that was going or not happening, as you're saying, Olley. James, let me ask you something about the game itself. Obviously, we've been here before, and here we go again. Tottenham winning 2-0, but we began this conversation by asking about Chelsea, and we were really interested to know what you think about what's going on. Obviously, 4 goals scored in 2023. They're just an absolute mess on the pitch. They don't look obviously like a collection of a team, but rather individuals. Where's your thinking now, I guess, is my question. Is it on the poor planning from Bowley, Graham Potter, both? What do you think?
They've spent £600 million, and their best defender is 38 years old, and their best attacker they don't even own.
Thank you. Good night. That's pretty much it.
But I mean, if you wanted to encapsulate just where they are at the moment, that is it for me. And look, some of this is on the ownership, some of this is on the manager. Just the sheer scale of change that has taken place since the Todd Bowley-led takeover in May, it is remarkable at all levels of the club. You think about the infrastructure, the scouting department, the recruitment department, obviously the playing squad, backroom staff. The sheer change in that club in the last 10 months or so it's been absolutely unfathomable, really. So I have a lot of sympathy with Graham Potter. He's also dealing with, a hugely bloated squad, many of whom obviously know they're not going to get anywhere near the team. He's got to deal with them on a daily basis at Cobham and try and integrate everybody, keep them happy, keep them motivated, keep them engaged. It is a difficult task, and everything I'm told from the ownership repeatedly, time and again, is we trust Graham Potter. He's our man, long-term plan, all of this. But there's 2 things here. One is, and I've said this on this show before, but I think it is worth repeating. The ownership may have changed, but the fan base hasn't. And the fans are starting to question whether Graham Potter is of sufficient calibre that they are used to, of the managers in the past, and they are used to a hire and fire. They are used to success. And when you spend £600 million and you give all of these players, the vast majority of them anyway, very long-term contracts, you can't get rid of the players. It only heightens the pressure on the manager, because you can't dish out 6, 7, 8-year contracts to all these players and then say, right, we're sticking with the manager. Actually, these players aren't good enough. We're going to get rid of them. In essence, in this idea of long-term planning and giving out these lengths of contracts actually only emboldens the player power in that dressing room, and actually makes it. I understand the logic of doing it, but just the sheer length and volume of those contracts actually puts more short-term pressure on Graham Potter. Now, that's not to say that Graham Potter is underperforming as manager, because I think he would admit that himself. The results have not been good enough. I think it's 2 wins in their last 15 games across all competitions. So clearly he needs to be getting more out of them. But I think those 2 points, the fact that the fan base is starting to turn, and also the fact that the players know it's going to be them, it's going to be him, it's not going to be them, is making this very, very difficult for the owners to stay faithful to him.
Do you agree with that, Janusz?
Oh, absolutely. I've mentioned as well the fan base. It's going to get even worse right now, and that's not the end of it, because the number of players and the length of contract is important, because what's in front of them is even more spending. Because as I've mentioned, I mean, they're going to have to go out there and get a striker that's going to be 100 million or plus, most likely. If you look at João Felix, he's playing well. On the assumption that they're going to buy him out, that's going to be another 100. And guess what? They'll probably need another 1 or 2 veteran players who can get their arms around some of these young players, and who knows, that's going to be another 100, maybe even more. So we're talking 300, maybe 400 million in the summer as well. And, you know, I'm not an FFP guy as well, but with the amount of spending right now, they better be getting some money in as well, because you've got to ask question at some stage. Okay, you have the money and you're going to spend it, but how much is you know, too much, I suppose. So I think it's a mess. And as I've said, look, when it comes to the fan base, I guess they can tell me all they want that they want Graham Potter long term. But if Borussia Dortmund come to town and eliminate Chelsea next week, I think this is going to be the beginning of the end of Graham Potter.
Yeah, I agree. Just because, you know, this is a results-driven industry, but I do want to quickly just mention one thing, and it's important to remember this about Todd Boehly, right? Who, when he came in, as Janusz said earlier, right, he took over a very tense environment in Chelsea Football Club. So he came in. So for many fans, it was an immediate welcome, because they knew that he was coming with a certain degree of reputation and ambition, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the problem, though. And I think Todd Boehly, hopefully, I doubt it, should really look at it himself. When he first arrived, we have to remember that this is a man that came from the world of MLB, right? Where almost long-term planning as well as immediate impact are sometimes always working together, but it's a completely different world in the trades deadlines during the offseason when it comes to MLBs. This is the Premier League and European football, where you only have two specific markets to make things happen. And I believe that his lack of experience, right, in the European football market, right, kind of got in the way of what really he should have done, which was much more careful thinking and structuring in January, because let's remember that for a while, he was also the director of football himself. It was him just making all the decisions. And I think that there was a little bit of an arrogance and lack of understanding of what really needed to be done. And yes, Graham Potter absolutely is responsible for a lot of what's going on, but make no mistake about it. Poor planning overall since he came and in January is also a big part of it.
Or just quickly, deceptive planning. And maybe James, you know, because, you know, and this is just a guess on my part, but for the life of me, I don't believe that Graham Potter signed up for this. I don't think when they were talking to him,
definitely not.
This sort of, I mean, there may have been a plan of rebuilding Chelsea in a certain way, right? When you know, the ownership was talking to Graham Potter, but no chance with this amount of player, this amount of spending, Graham Potter would probably, I would have to guess, had he known what was going to happen, if this was the plan, he'd probably say no to the job.
Remember where he came from, Janusz? He came from a club that does the complete opposite of what Chelsea do, which is careful, smart spending, smart selling, right? Trust in the process, but also trust in the strategy and the culture. Chelsea is completely different to Brighton, and that is a big surprise for him, definitely.
There are a lot of competing voices at the top of the club in terms of recruitment. You know, I know that from speaking to people around the club in January. I mean, Madueke is quite a good example. So Madueke was somebody that was on Brighton's radar. Paul Winstanley worked with Potter previously. He was somebody that they were looking at, and I think that was a signing that Potter had an influence in. Someone like Michail Mudryk, I would think, was more of a not necessarily, I don't think you can call a €100 million deal opportunistic, but I think they saw an opportunity there with Arsenal trying to negotiate. A lot of talk around that player. Not saying they hadn't done the diligence on it, but I think he was someone that maybe was presented to Potter as an option rather than somebody that Potter had gone to and said, look, I think this player is what we need to improve the team. So there's certainly that. I think there's also one thing I thought we should just touch on here was when Thiago Silva went off injured, the captain's armband went to Reece James. And I thought that was quite indicative of the lack of leadership there is on the pitch at the moment for all the money that they've spent. And you think about, you know, this is not a criticism of Reece James because he loves the club, been there a long time. You know, people talk about him very positively in terms of the impact he has in the squad. But you start going through that starting lineup today, and we'll all talk about the money that's been spent, and obviously particularly the options off the bench and all the money there. But actually, who would that captain's armband go to?
Yeah, he's 23, not on the pitch. James. He's 23 years old, yeah.
Yeah, but you look at it and you think, well, who else does it go to? Ruben Loftus-Cheek, he's been there a while, but you wouldn't really give him the captain's armband. You can't give it Hal Felix, he's been there 5 minutes. Enzo Fernandez, okay, big price tag, but he's 22. Raheem Sterling, maybe, but he's never really been the captain kind of player, whether that's for England or at Manchester City. Ben Chilwell, possibly, but he's not been there that long. Not been a regular starter. Ziyech, well, he was almost playing for PSG in January, and suddenly he's played 3 of the 5 games since the window closed. I mean, that again, another bizarre one. He's a player you're quite happy to let go out on loan. Doesn't go out on loan because the paperwork doesn't get filed properly at the last minute, and then he plays 3 of the next 5 games. What? He's either in your plans or he isn't. But just on the leadership point, I do think that, again, I don't want to make excuses for Graham Potter, but I do think that's something where if he, losing Thiago Silva is a big blow for him. If that turns out to be a serious injury, because who else is there on the pitch in the game to help him? Just help the team. Who do they turn to? Who do they look to give them a little bit of leadership, a little bit of guidance in those difficult moments? There isn't anyone out there for all the money they've spent, and that, I think, is something that is really exacerbating these short-term problems.
Yeah, and obviously a leader's something. I don't really think age comes into it too much with a leader, because look at Jude Bellingham when he's had to take the armband on, and he's absolutely great when he's had to do that for Borussia Dortmund. But James, seeing as though you did just touch on a few moments within the game there, tell us a few things that you actually saw that maybe we didn't see watching at home. What was the body language like of the Chelsea players today on the pitch? Yeah,
I mean, not great, to be honest. Look, I mean, I always think Mason Mount is a very ebullient, gregarious character on the pitch, and when he came on, he just looked quite angry. I mean, there's a contract situation going on with him, which is rumbling along in the background, but he came on, he just sort of kicked a few people, argued with the referee, got booked. Didn't really affect the game. I mean, Hakim Ziyech, I think that they eventually, although it was a convoluted way of getting there, they got to the right decision in terms of not sending him off. But I mean, he was essentially asked to play this role where they were playing sort of 4-2-3-1, but then when they lost the ball, Chelsea, he was dropping into this right back position to play as a back 5 to kind of match Spurs up with the wing backs in the wide areas. Clearly a role he didn't like doing. Clearly a role he wasn't particularly interested in. And if he was sent off or taken off, I think he would prefer not to be out there rather than having to perform a role. He's at a club, let's be honest, he probably doesn't want to be at anymore. He thought he'd be playing with Lionel Messi at Paris Saint-Germain now. And as it is, he's playing in a team that's won 2 of their last 15 games and are changing their lineup every 5 minutes. So no, the body language wasn't great. You could see players getting frustrated with each other when there were misplaced passes and moves breaking down. The combination play in the final third quite often was non-existent. I saw Raheem Sterling and 1 or 2 other players sort of throwing their hands up a little bit in the air at times when they're in space and not getting the ball. It just all smacks of being. I'm not saying they're not trying, but they're obviously low on confidence. And I think they're all getting very frustrated about how disjointed they look and just how much of a state of flux everything's in. There's no rhythm, there's no stability, and it just shows in their play.
All right, well, we're nearly wrapping up here on ESPNFC YouTube. Janusz, any final thoughts on this game? I mean, it's been a lot of Chelsea, not enough Tottenham, I guess. Anything else from this game for you?
Chelsea or Tottenham? I mean, Chelsea, you can tell that the players are feeling pressure. They're playing scared. I mean, we can talk about, for example, their fullbacks, Reece James in particular, who's a very, very good player, who hardly gotten forward, really didn't make any impact. Chilwell, another player that didn't help. And Chelsea, I think, when they play with 4 in the back, for me, are based on that. At least I associate a good Chelsea when the fullbacks are functioning properly as well. If you look at the center of the pitch, I think Enzo's doing enough. There's just not too many players around him. Loftus-Cheek, for me, he's still not a Chelsea type of player as well. So not enough leaders. I think the players smell it. I think they know it's not good enough. Look, Spurs are a perfect example of that. I mean, they're just as inconsistent and have some issues as well. But here's a team with a manager like Antonio Conte, who's actually, we're not even sure if he's going to be here at the end of the season. There are question marks. But this is a team that's still that's in top 4. They're still in FA Cup and have a very good chance of going past Milan in the Champions League. And I think we all agree here that Spurs need a lot of work. They're certainly not as deep, which I think maybe helps them given Chelsea's number of players.
Yeah, a couple of pointers then just to wrap up from you, James. What's next for Chelsea? What does this result mean? And then just a word to Oliver Skipp's goal and Harry Kane scoring again here for Spurs.
Yeah, look, Chelsea have got Leeds, I think, next, and then Dortmund. And without getting into a financial fair play conversation, that is another huge pressure that will mount on Graham Potter. They're now 14 points off the top 4, and having spent £600 million since since the Bowley-led takeover was completed last May. To miss out on Champions League football would be a huge blow. Look, they're clearly not the best team in Europe, but they weren't the best team in Europe in 2012 or 2021, and they went on to win the Champions League. It would be an unbelievable effort if they were to do it from here. But I think keeping their season alive by beating Dortmund is absolutely huge for Potter and for the players. When you think about, we're talking about how many players you can't get in the team, and that bloated squad. If they've only got one competition to focus on, that is going to make it even harder for him to keep everyone happy. But yeah, on Spurs, I mean, a word on Oliver Skipp really, because I think when Rodrigo Bentancur's injury became known, that was a huge blow for Tottenham, because when Bentancur and Kulusevski came in January last season, they were the difference really to getting them above Arsenal, finishing in the top four. And they don't really have another midfielder who can do what Bentancur to do with them without the ball. You'd say Basuma is more of a stopper. He's obviously out for a long time as well, but Skipp has a lot in his locker. He's got a lot of potential, and I think to score his first goal today, I thought Højbjerg was excellent alongside him as well. And if those two can really reproduce that performance consistently in the weeks ahead, that gives them a real platform to kick on in the Champions League and in the Premier League.
Good stuff. Great to hear from all of you. We're going to let you guys get to the Carabao Cup final. Make sure you enjoy that. It's on now on ESPN+. We'll see you next time.